Welcome to OECD Podcast, where policy meets people.
The world is suffering from a devastating drought. According to an August report from the European Drought Observatory, nearly 2/3 of European territory is either experiencing drought or on high alert due to stifling heatwaves and minimal rainfall. The consequences are far-reaching. Electricity production, crop yields, and inland shipping are just a few of the sectors being hit, as wildfires expand and rivers run dry. And Europe isn't alone. From the Horn of Africa to the western United States, severe drought is threatening lives and livelihoods. Today, I'm joined by Xavier Leflaive, Water Team Leader at the OECD Environment Directorate, who will give us a sense of what's at stake as the world braces for higher temperatures and water scarcity. We'll talk about what governments can do in the short and long term and how the international community can respond. Thanks for joining me, Xavier.
Thanks for having me, Karina.
This summer, I think, has been a wake-up call for a lot of people when it comes to seeing the effects of climate change firsthand. There have been massive wildfires, devastating heat waves, and especially that we've seen in France and in Europe, water shortages. In France, more than 100 municipalities are short on water. So I guess to start the discussion, is this our new normal? Is this something that we can expect now every summer moving forward?
Well, indeed, as you notice, water is everywhere. It's making headline news. And what I would like to emphasize is that this is no more unique. If you look back just last year, I mean, the situation in France was quite similar in terms of drought and water scarcity. And 2/3 of the territory was really affected by that. If you look beyond California, it has been hit by the drought for 2 decades. So what we are witnessing today seems to repeat more frequently. It's no more unique, no more exceptional. What we can learn from that is that we are facing more uncertainty. So we now have to brace ourselves and prepare.
So in terms of that preparedness, we've seen some measures already. There are restrictions on irrigation, water use. How do you see the response of French government or other governments in Europe so far or elsewhere in the world in terms of dealing and adapting to this crisis?
Well, restricting water use is quite a common response that we've seen in a number of countries. It probably makes sense as an emergency or immediate response when we are facing a crisis, but it is a very costly and, in a sense, inappropriate response because restricting water use can affect different communities differently. Typically, when it comes to agriculture or other sectors who need water for their usual business or way of operation. But if we can anticipate that we'll have to adjust to new conditions, then there are other type of responses that can be considered. In our work, we've seen that, for instance, most OECD countries are currently revising or reforming their water allocation regime. Water allocation regime is a set of rules, policies, institutions that determine who can use how much water and when and for what. And the point is that in most OECD countries, these regimes have been designed in times of plenty. So they are now maladapted to times of scarcity. So I think more attention on these. Another type of response is to make sure people realize that water is scarce. And you can signal that in different ways. In some countries, you can put a price on water, and if it's well designed, the price can signal the fact that water is scarce, and that if I use it, my neighbor or another user downstream will have less opportunity to use water, and that can harm him. And of course, where appropriate, you can augment the supply of water. We can probably make a better use of rainwater, capturing it when it pours and using it when it is needed. We can make a better use of what we call reclaimed water, which is wastewater that is treated to particular quality standards so that it can be reused for agriculture or for cleaning our floors or our streets. In our work, we like to emphasize that augmenting supply, in particular through desalination, should come last.
So it kind of seems to me like we need a combination of national, international responses, changes to infrastructure and the way we go about the kind of a recalibration of our relationship with water as societies, but also changes on the individual level. Are there any examples of countries that have implemented innovative policies already? I'm curious if there are any models to highlight or if there's kind of a lot of work to improve for everyone.
Every country is facing challenges, be it in terms of water scarcity and drought. Some are doing better than others, but I don't think there is any model. Of course, you can think of the Netherlands, for instance, which are probably the world champions when it comes to addressing flood risks, because 2/3 of the territory and a large share of the GDP is below sea level. You can see other countries like Western states in the US, for instance, which are severely affected by long-lasting drought.
So international cooperation is definitely something that we'll discuss in this episode. But when we talk about what the international community is dealing with right now, there are so many intersecting crises. We're navigating a major food insecurity crisis that has been exacerbated by the war in Ukraine and that it seems will be worsened further by water scarcity. I'm curious if you could explain a little bit how drought and water scarcity affect the food supply and whether we should brace ourselves for even worse outcomes due to the high temperatures we're seeing and the consequences globally.
Yes, Karina, this is a massive question. What really drives yields for agriculture production is a different type of water that we usually consider. We call it green water. It's actually moisture, soil moisture. It's humidity in the air. It's vapor. I mean, that's really what determines agriculture yield. We now realize that what we call green water has been radically disrupted by the way our economies grow and develop. This is one of the consequences, or actually one of the drivers of climate change. Drier air, drier soil are affecting the hydrological cycle in ways which are new in human history. This has a number of consequences. It has another dimension, is that this green water, vapor or humidity in the air travels long distance. So typically deforestation in Central Asia today affects water scarcity and precipitation in northern China. What brings another dimension to water crisis, it's this global dimension. There is another dimension to this connection between water and agriculture and what we call food security, is trade. Every single country actually has to make a political decision whether they can trust global markets to procure the food they need. And if I decide I can trust global markets and trade, then I don't need to grow these crops on my own territory. The thing is that over the last decade, maybe with some form of retreat of globalization, we tend to, and this is exacerbated by the war between Ukraine and Russia, at the moment, two major food or crop exporting countries. The decision to rely on global food markets for food security becomes more challenging. And this is likely to have consequences on the way countries decide to access food. If I rely less on global markets.
Everything that you've just said and that we've kind of been alluding to throughout this conversation is the need for coordinated action. This is something that is affecting every country around the world. So what have we seen already at the international level? I know that next March, the UN is holding its first water conference in over 4 decades. So what can we expect in terms of objectives of this?
We know UN conference can't change the world, but they can initiate new discussions, new partnerships, new commitments. And so one of my expectations is that UN conference next year, which will be the first UN conference focused on water in 47, 48 years. So it's not something that happens every day. So my expectation is that we manage to put water on the radar it's a bold ambition, but it's a condition to really change the way we approach water and water is being managed. Because again, these communities who work on economic growth and development, land use, urban development, agriculture, energy supply, and the like, they are the ones who actually drive how water is being used. Another dimension, which is how to engage with the finance community. Every single industry globally or value chain is exposed and vulnerable to water risk. That can create a number of consequences which can affect the finance community. If I'm an investor and I invest in a garment company, a garment factory, or a blue chip company, I may not be aware that these industries are actually very heavily dependent on water availability.
So it sounds like the OECD has a pretty substantial role to play in this. What you just discussed in terms of working with finance communities seems like something that the OECD could really leverage its convening power and also its expertise for. You mentioned earlier that a lot of the people making decisions about water policy are not always water experts. I'm curious if you could just tell me a little bit more about specifically what the OECD's place is in this.
Well, indeed, I think the OECD has a unique role to play for a number of reasons. One, because we specialize in economics, and very few organizations, globally approach water from an economics perspective. We also a multi-sectoral organization. If you compare the OECD with UN agencies, typically you will have UN agencies focusing on environment, urbanization, food, and energy. At the OECD, we all work under the same roof, and considering the cross-cutting nature of water, this is definitely an advantage, and it's very easy while I work in the Environment Directorate to engage and cooperate with colleagues who work on urban issues, for instance, agriculture, infrastructure. And of course, everything we do needs to be policy relevant. And so that you mentioned our convening power. I think we have that capacity to engage with governments. And again, this is, I think, a distinctive capacity we have. That's why I was really thrilled when I was approached by the sponsors of the Global Commission. The idea is to say that, look, 20 years ago, there was a Stern report on climate, which was able to really change the conversation on the economics of climate change. The Netherlands set up a Global Commission, which has about 20 members, and which is led by 4 co-chairs. And the 4 co-chairs are really champions who can really help redirect the analysis and the conversation on water. On the 4 co-chairs are Marina Mazzucato, a very innovative and thought-provoking economist based at UCL. Johan Rockström, who is one of the promoters of this concept of planetary boundaries, and Johan has a unique understanding of some of the issues I mentioned earlier about green water and this hydrological cycle and how it has been disrupted, or it is being disrupted by climate change and by the way our economies grow. Beyond that, also to engage with a range of, as we said earlier, policy communities who have to better understand how their decisions, on the one hand, affect water availability and use, but at the same time are dependent on water availability. The role of the OECD here is to facilitate or support the work of the Global Commission. We are positioned as some sort of a coordination hub to bring together the different work streams. March 2023 will be a key milestone with the UN conference, but that will not be the end of the journey. There will be another year to embark into more research, more detailed recommendations. We are one of the very few organizations globally who work on economics, who approach water from an economic perspective. So I have no doubt that the Global Commission can make a huge difference and can really inspire our work.
It's a huge subject. We've only had so much time, but I think this will give listeners a lot of context to understand the news. And thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
To learn more about the OECD's work on water, visit www.oecd.org/water.
To listen to other OECD podcasts, find us on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and SoundCloud.com/OECD.